So, good afternoon. Welcome the most loyal participants of this conference. And I think, of course, we had very interesting and deep discussion on state aid policy. Now we will have quite specific issue, but very important one. So, and I would like to welcome participants of this discussion, Professor Shackleton, Carlo Stagnaro, and Barbara Mičková. So we will have a discussion about state aid and state-owned enterprises. So is the state aid enterprises is in the view of state aid policy? Does the state aid policy sometimes pay attention to this problem of state aid enterprises? And because we all know that especially in infrastructure industries as railways, energy, or airways, majority of companies are still state-owned, and allowing especially state aid in these sectors generally means that state continues to support and increase state-owned companies in these sectors. And especially when we see this exemption list on state aid policy, we can even question if these sectors are in the state aid policy discretion. And but also I want to raise other issue that we talk not only current state-owned companies, but also on initiatives to establish a new one, and how this policy, state aid policy, can help us to prevent these steps. For example, in Lithuania, we have now initiative of establishing state pharmacy stores. That our government wants to step in the market where they went out a long time ago. And even we have very extensive competition of private pharmacies. So how we can stop these steps of local governments before they start to do this and to make the damage for the market. So I would like to ask every one of you just to make at the beginning general insights on the topic state aid policy and state-owned enterprises. Please, Barbara.
Thank you very much, and thank you for staying. So my name is Barbara Mičková, and it's an honor for me to talk about experience of new entrants experience with state aid. I spent last 5 years helping new entrants, first in the role of public affairs manager and in Leo Express, and Leo Express became then one of the co-founding members of ALLRAIL. ALLRAIL is Association Alliance of New Entrants and Ticket Vendors, where I'm currently policy officer. I really like the topic, and however, from our point of view, if the topic would be do they coexist, state aid and possible competition, the answer would be no. Currently, it's not really compatible. I think we have to be honest at the beginning with what is the objective of state aid, and from our experience, there can be two points of view. So either it's because there is some need that market cannot establish itself, and in the railway sector, because of passengers, to really create rail as an option for transportation. Therefore, we have state aid for rail, or we have, and also, and now in the terms of Green Deal, there is either a bigger push for having rail as an option for transportation, or the state aid serves as a tool for just certain railway undertakings to protect them and to protect them on economical level, that they will remain the dominant position, which from our perspective is a little bit distorting the market. So let's look at on the European market now what we have. So we have usually state-owned companies, the national companies. Then we have daughter companies. One of I think the most well-known example is Arriva, a daughter company of Deutsche Bahn. But we have several other examples. Then we have competitors other than state-owned, also in the regional PSO, so on regional level, and we have really a few on long distance and international services. Almost all of them are in ALLRAIL, so we have Westbahn in Austria, we have two in the Czech Republic, Early Express and RegioJet. We have Italo in Italy on a high speed. We have MTR in Sweden, and then we have attempt of several as Transdev, but basically this is it. And they are here not because the market was slightly opened. There was a promise of that the market will be open, because all of these started their operations when the third and then later four-wheel package started. But I think they started and they are operating on despite the market and despite the market condition and despite how the market works now. We see great potential in rail. That was of all our members the entry point. We thought that people just won't be able to continue traveling by car because it wouldn't be sustainable. They will spend too much time in cars, and so we have to find other options. And a railway with a huge density of infrastructure that we have now, that would be a great option, not waiting for flying drones or a hyperloop or waiting for new options. So we thought that a railway would be a great entry point also from the environmental reasons, etc. However, the current status is slightly different. If you look at the regulation, I promise I'll be short. We have one principal regulation is 1370 on public service obligations, and basically how we read it is there should be open access, so it should be commercially market driven, and the market should take care of public service. And if this is not commercially viable, then there should be PSO. And how PSO should be awarded, it should be tender, as in other sectors, and direct award should be exception. And we entered the transition period just yesterday. I don't know if you feel it already, but we are in transition period that started yesterday until 2023, when member states should prepare themselves for opening of the railway market. How member states, however, read the regulation is there's PSO, and on certain routes there can be also open access. So the PSO is it's the main scope. How PSO is awarded is direct award, and tender is it happens in regions, but now, especially in the transition period, it happens less and less. And transition period has to be used for protecting the state-owned incumbents. So what we see on 19th of September, Austrian politicians voted for awarding 11 billion euro PSO for ÖBB, state-owned company, for the big contract for PSO in Austria. In Germany, day after, they said because of environmental reasons, they will help the rail by pumping 1 billion euro every year to Deutsche Bahn. Just several days after, Deutsche Bahn said that they will buy 30 sets of high-speed trains, and also they said that they will not sell Arriva eventually. And just a couple weeks ago in Poland, they said that they will also do quite large direct award until 2029 for 4.6 billion euros, which is 4 times higher than the current contract. So this is slightly the vision of member state on opening of the market, and it's not really compatible what new entrants would like to see if they are not going to be kicked out soon from the market. We have the same experience with rolling stock. When you are a state-owned company, first you can use probably the money also for buying new rolling stock. You have state guarantees. This is something that new entrants, private companies are not experiencing. Then access to data, access to facilities. There are all these parts of not having the equal access. It's not just if the state will continue this way that new entrants wouldn't survive it. It's also that passengers wouldn't survive traveling by rail anymore, and they will stay in cars, they will stay in the plane. The experience we have and our passengers on all markets have wherever competition started, there was a great impact on passenger lives. We see it in Italo improved or increased the passenger ridership for 50%. The same in PSO in Slovakia, when there started to be competition for less taxpayers' money. And Czech Republic, because one line was open, on one line started competition. In the whole country, there is 40% increase of passenger kilometers. So wherever competition started, really people started to use rail with better quality, with less public money. Well, we see if new entrants will make it until 2024 and after.
Right. Well, it's rather odd, rather ironic, really, that Britain started this privatisation process. But there's a lot of people in Britain now who want to row back from it, and you're probably aware that the official opposition has a policy of renationalising the railways, the energy, water, and even the Royal Mail, something which was only privatised a few years ago, in fact, in the UK. Opinion polls suggest that this is something which the public actually approve of. You know, there's majorities in opinion polls for each of these renationalisations. Furthermore, Jeremy Corbyn has spoken of taking a slice of BT, Openreach, which is the broadband part of it. So it may well be that from the middle of this month we're going to see a really big change in Britain's attitude to the state, though I hope not. We'll see how that shapes up. If these policies were carried out, of course, there'd be a lot of peripheral damage as well, because, for example, Royal Mail, it still has a virtual monopoly of letter mail, which is declining like that. It only has a 60% share of the market of parcels, and you can see that if it was renationalised, those 40% of the parcel market would lose out by that, and many of them are actually other European countries who operate, including Germany, of course, operate in the UK parcels market. It's actually, Britain has a privatised sector, but it's a very odd mix of public and private. I come in to work on C2C, which is a line in on the Essex coast, and it's actually run by Trenitalia. And my electricity comes from EDF, which is the French electricity company, and so forth. And so one of the paradoxes of privatisation in Britain is that it's actually opened up opportunities for the state-operated enterprises of other countries. And indeed, some people have raised questions about that, because clearly, if your trains are being run for you by Trenitalia, Trenitalia is not going to go bust. Whereas, a genuinely private operator in the UK has that potential of going bust. So, is that fair competition? That issue has been raised. Now, of course, the other question which arises is that maybe Jeremy Corbyn won't win the next election, and we will have a Boris Johnson-led government, which we've already seen some signs of. And as Shento pointed out, we're already hearing noises about scrapping state aid and so forth. How Boris imagines he's going to negotiate a deal with the European Union, which runs, a bulldozer through that very important principle of no state aid, or at least constraints on the state aid. I don't know. So it's a very exciting situation at the moment, and it's actually a very worrying situation, I think, for people who believe in competition. And we'll see how that shapes up. Anyway, I'll pass you over to Carlo.
Thank you. I think that the first question we should try to ask in this panel is, why does state ownership exist at all? I think that I don't believe there is any case where state ownership is required. I consider there may be cases where some argument for state ownership can be made, even though not really convincing. Typically, the so-called natural monopolies and the like. Leave them aside. In most cases where the state owns companies, the reason is purely either ideological or political. Ideological in the sense that Corbyn probably raises this point, because there is a belief that state is best equipped and more reliable to run stuff. And political in the sense that state ownership is a way to prevent the failure of a company which is deemed as strategic. When a politician says that something is strategic, 99% of the times means that there is no way to get profits from that company, and so it should be put on the shoulders of taxpayers. Now, if this is true, if there is no theoretical reason why state ownership should exist in a well-functioning market, I think that while state aid policy is, generally speaking, with all the criticisms that have been raised, still state aid policy is one of the most successful policies in the European Union. Yet, I think that a major flaw in the policy is that it fails to distinguish between state-owned and privately owned companies. And the reason why such a distinction should be introduced in state-owned in state aid policies are basically threefold. First of all, there is a direct effect from the presence of a state-owned company in the market. It is much more likely that a state-owned company is successful in capturing regulators than a privately owned company. I spent 4 years of my life working for the Italian government, and to quote Rutger Hauer in Blade Runner, I have seen things you people couldn't imagine. So, including there was sometime a proposal that was actually implemented to create, quote unquote, an online platform like Amazon to sell made in Italy stuff. Somebody raised a hand and said, please try to Google, quote unquote, online platform like Amazon to sell made in Italy stuff. The first result you get is the online made in Italy platform from Amazon. Yet our the equivalent of Royal Mail, Poste Italiane, actually created this online platform like Amazon, and it basically did not work. And there is one very good reason why. There was no need whatsoever for it. Because all Italian SMEs who wanted to sell their stuff online, they went to Amazon. Because everybody goes to Amazon to buy stuff. Nobody goes to Poste Italiane website to buy stuff. Anyway, so there is a direct effect in terms of regulatory capture. Then there is a second indirect effect. Let's suppose that you play soccer, and you play in a team, and you are going to start a match with another team. Then you realize that the captain of the other team is the son of the referee. Would you trust that the rules are correctly enforced. Now, the point is not the behavior of the referee. The referee may even be absolutely fair in managing his function. The point is that you will not trust in him. And not trusting in him, you would not play soccer. In the case of market competition, the perceived cost of entry in a market would be greater. And so the result from the mere presence of a state-owned company in a market is that you are likely to have lower entry rates and lower competition. I had a paper a few years ago in Economic Affairs on the energy sector, and I found a positive and statistically significant correlation between the ownership of the incumbent in the energy sector and the market share of the incumbent. Where the incumbent is state-owned, it is much more, its market share is likely to be much greater. And finally, there is an indirect effect, which is what Len was talking, a third indirect effect, which is what basically Len was also talking about. When we talk about competition and when the EU Commission makes assessments about competition, we always focus on the product market. But behind the product market, there is the market for factors, the market for assets. Since a state-owned company is basically subtracted from the possibility of failure, that means that the assets, I mean capital and labor, of that company cannot be moved to other potentially more productive firms. And this imposes a sort of tax on consumers, a sort of tax on the entire economy. So, since there are these effects, I believe it would be justified to modify, well, it's virtually impossible from the political point of view, but I think it would be justified to modify, to change the state aid discipline in the European Union in order to introduce specific regulations regarding state-owned companies. And like the garden of the neighbor, you know, the garden of the neighbor is always the greener than yours. I think that the state monopolist of the neighbor is always better than yours. And this is why I would be more tolerant with foreign state-owned companies than I would be with domestic foreign state-owned companies. And the reason is that the ability of Trenitalia to capture the British government is much lower than the ability of Trenitalia to capture the Italian government, and vice versa if you had a state-owned monopolist. Anyway, I think there should be some greater reflection on the need to introduce specific measures to limit the ability of state-owned companies to compete in the market. Maybe in the next round I will use the next round to raise a few proposals, but for now I stop here.
Thank you all. I wanted to touch at the beginning this exemption question, because if we look at the list, we can say that these exemptions leave some sectors apart of state aid policy. And especially we see that usually it's state-owned industries, and we can also create some political conspiracy that, you know, politicians want fair competition where private players are playing in the market, but they want somehow to exclude from these strict rules state-owned companies. And even European Commission says that they treat equally state and private players. So what would be the decision? What would suggest for the European Commission how to review this exemption list, and especially having in mind this state-owned companies problem? So maybe Barbara, or I would look forward for everyone comment.
Okay, I'm very quick on this. I would substitute the 250 whatever words of the exception with 3 words: no exception whatsoever.
Well, I think in the case of something like railways, you know, there is a concept in Britain, I'm sure it's a similar thing in Germany, of the social railway. The idea that part of this operation is, you know, off bounds to markets in a sense. And we have some ways of putting that up to competition. So when you look at franchises for passenger operations, you can have some kind of reverse auction to force down the subsidy, and that kind of works, although there have been a number of occasions when it's turned out rather badly because the companies have estimated their costs wrongly, or what's happening to demand wrongly, and so on. So you can mess around with that, but yeah, I'm sort of in favour of the Carlo end of this, you know. Perhaps not 0 exemptions, but a lot less than there are at the moment, because you know, we've had some examples today of things which I wasn't aware of, which you could get exemptions for, and I think you know, the Commission ought to look very, very closely at these exemptions, which may have made sense 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and so on, but the possibilities for competition today are technologically much greater than they were in the past, and we need to have that kind of modern thinking rather than the old, you know, the old social railway type thinking.
I understand that the member states are in a really difficult position because they wake up in the morning, people at the Ministry of Transportation, and they say, well, we have to open up the market. This is also in European legislation, and it makes sense to us. We will liberalize the market. But then a couple of hours later, they said, well, we are also owners. We are representing owners of the state-owned company, so we can't really do it. And in the afternoon, they find out that they also have to transpose the legislation in an impartial way. And in the evening, the trade unions come and explain them how a railway works. This is, I think, the first problem, because usually it's the same people that really decide what if it's going to be tendered, if it's going to be directly awarded. Then they are also representing the state in the state aid company, in the railway undertaking, and they are also transposing the legislation. So you can't really do behave as the owner and set impartial rules, because then with your example it wouldn't be the referee's son, but it would be the referee's referee, and then playing for one team, and then going to the tribune and say who of the players will be sold and who will be bought from the other team. And this is, I think, the first problem, to see what is really the transportation, what should be done on Ministry of Transportation, DG Move level, and what is more property thing, financing, so Ministry of Finance, etc. So I think this is the first trouble that we face.
And the third question, before maybe we'll hear some comments from the audience on this issue, that the difficulty with state-owned enterprises that they have much more space on finding indirect ways to get state support. And sometimes, yes, if we see if it's really, you can do unfinancial ways, and for example, it's the question if state aid policy touches such questions as state-owned company start new services, delivering new services, even without any governmental subsidies and some additional funding. Also, I look forward Barbara will tell more about maybe some debt relief of state-owned enterprises. So, and of course, there are the space to create some special rules for state-owned enterprises, like we had in Lithuania current initiative that our state-owned company, postal company, was had the problem because it was competition to win the agreement to deliver pensions for some pensioners, and for a long time ago that was a competition every year. And then when our state-owned company lost the majority part of agreements in different regions, some members of the parliament, wanted to introduce a law that this service should be delivered only by this mail company, state-owned company. So, and it's always the question if it's already in the scope of state aid policy, or still we need locals to deal with this problem alone.
I think it's difficult with railway, and it will be super interesting how the Commission will hopefully try to find a way, because railway sector is basically state-driven sector. How we maybe falsely see it as new entrants, we see that the railway is only viable if it's passenger-driven, if it's really market-driven. However, as there were only one player per state for a long time, it became a system that works perfectly. So it's not really, the rules are not really member states' rules, but it's more the state-owned company rules. And for them, it will be very difficult when they will have to give up some of their parts of their system that was so costly to establish. Regarding the debt relief and debt cancellation, this is something that always strikes me, because I thought that that the state order service, which was paid either in PSO with operations or any other service. So I don't understand how the big debt can really emerge now, because if of all these services were ordered and therefore the state-owned company provided, it was already paid. So where does the debt come from? And why is it that this type of economy works only in railway? Because then you can go into another sector, also the private companies. They said, well, you ordered something, but apparently there is huge imbalances between the revenues and your cost, and therefore you can apply the debt relief, the debt cancellation. This is something that is perfectly normal already for the people in railway sector, but it's not normal for any other sectors. And when someone comes with a passenger-driven point of view, so let's do the service that passengers would like to buy, and then test the pricing level. But and apparently it works in all the markets that the new entrants entered. It's something that is damaging the current system, and the states are protecting hard the system how it should work. And we see it now, especially with the Green Deal, when say, oh yeah, there's Green Deal, we need more people in train, so let's buy and have more trains. So maybe in the end we will have more trains, but we won't have people in it, because it's not just about trains, it's about additional service, it's about digitalization. If for me, a big issue is real-time data. When you are stuck in car, you can see already on Waze how long you will be stuck there, or if you can go some other way. In the railway, you don't have such information. You're a little bit trapped, and I think people nowadays, they don't think in 2060. You can't get them back, and I think we need to find a way how to really focus on the consumer. If it's valid for the consumer, it can make the whole sector viable. If it means that it's protecting the system, so it wouldn't harm the system, then we shouldn't go for it, and the member states shouldn't go for it.
I haven't got anything really much to add to that, apart from the thing in the UK, which has been a big issue, is pension obligations. And I was speaking about only relatively recently was Royal Mail put into the private sector. And part of that deal was the government taking on the obligation of the Post Office Pension Fund, which was a rather odd thing to do, I think. But that's been a big issue in the UK.
Yeah, I think I don't either have anything particular smart to say except one thing. I'm not sure it is smart, I hope it is. I think one important step to make would be to require state-owned, the outstanding debt of state-owned company to be consolidated in general government debt, because SOEs are often, at least in my country, but I think also elsewhere, are often used to go around the European fiscal rules and to create debt which is not counted as public debt. If you require that wherever the government has the control of a company, the budget of that company is consolidated within the general government budget, at the very least you remove this reason for creating state-owned companies in the first place.
Yeah, just to add to that pension thing, it just reminded me to talk about the railways, but one of the reasons why Virgin, Richard Branson's company, has lost the West Coast line, which was the franchise that they had for 20 odd years, is that the government tried to actually unload the pension obligations onto new franchisees, and the Branson partnership pulled out at that stage, and it's actually been given to a franchise grouping, which includes, again, state operators who are able to take on these kind of obligations. And I think that was a very unfair element of Branson losing that franchise.
Maybe I would like to ask, because we all discussing on this issue, we are not lawyers. It would be really interesting to hear the insight of Mr. Santa from.
I'm not a lawyer,
but still.
I can make it up.
Yes, please make a few comments.
Well, I think the main observation I would make, listening to the discussion, is that the state-owned enterprise is not exempt from general competition law. And there have been a number of cases, the areas I'm most familiar with are telecoms, where the courts have said basically, we don't care what the regulator does. If this is anti-competitive, you've breached competition rules. And I'm thinking, in that case, Deutsche Telekom, and the regulator actually set the access rates and the retail rates, and the European Commission decided that these rates constituted a margin squeeze with respect to those people competing with Deutsche Telekom. And so if we have an excessive focus on state aids, which is an important issue, we're just ignoring the fact that these all have obligations under the general competition law. The point about the behaviour of state enterprises in terms of preempting competition, I remember when I was doing, I know we shouldn't be picking on Italy all the time, but you're doing it and you're Italian, as you keep on pointing out. But when I was doing work in Italy, Telecom Italia was very good at saying the so-called Socrates program, where they were going to roll out cable systems. They kept on saying, we're going to roll out 1 million homes in the next 3 years, which they never did. But any private investor coming in and deciding to build a cable system will suddenly say, hold on a minute, if Telecom Italia, with all its market power and state support, is going to roll out 1 million homes in 3 years, we haven't got a business. But the result was that no one's got cable, because Telecom Italia never honoured its promise to roll out the Socrates program. Final point. Your proposition about putting the debt of state-owned enterprises into general debt is an interesting one, because that's what kicked off the British privatisation programme. If you recall, historically, they wanted to get the debt of the nationalised industries off the books. They attempted to do this with a bond issue called the Busby bond, which failed completely because they said it wasn't a state-guaranteed one, but it was actually state-guaranteed, and no one took it up. And then someone said, well, why don't we privatise BT and get all this debt off our books by selling off the enterprise? So that was what really motivated originally the British privatisation programme. It was trying to get the general debt down. So it may work in Italy, I don't know.
Maybe someone from the audience has comments on this issue? Still not. So I want to come back on the situation of state aid, especially when we do have in Lithuania, because a huge subsidies to energy sector, which is almost owned by state, and when we look at the fair competition viewpoint, I think it not only interferes in the current competitors, private competitors, but also doesn't allow to enter a new one. And it's the question if politicians or EU Commission officials from state aid viewpoint, they evaluate this threat. So, Carlo, you have knowledge on energy sector. May you share your insights?
Yeah, as I said, I think there is very clear-cut evidence that state ownership discourages entry in the market. And on top of that, I mean, state-owned companies, again, to any practical purpose, they cannot fail. And not, I mean, the impossibility of failure means that their market share is also somehow going to be protected. In this respect, it is absolutely true that there is an inherent contradiction between liberalizing a sector and maintaining state ownership, and particularly maintaining state ownership of the incumbent. In the energy sector, this is a very, I mean, the Lithuanian experience is very common throughout Europe. I think with very few exceptions, including Britain, which is half within Europe and half outside, and maybe a few northern countries like Sweden and the Netherlands and to some extent Germany. In most other countries, the former monopolist is still either state-owned or state-controlled, and it still is the incumbent with market shares at least 30% or more. So this is there is really no way out from this deadlock without making a clear choice whether you want competition, therefore you have to have privatization, or you want to maintain state ownership, in which case you have to give up at least to some extent competition. As I said, the rational distinction that it would be possible and meaningful to make is between markets where competition is possible versus natural monopolies. I mean, if you have a state ownership within competitive markets, that is going to undermine competition itself. When you get to natural monopolies like power networks or railway networks and the like, at the very least, state ownership does not undermine per se the functioning of the market. It's a political choice. It's the wrong political choice, but it's still a political choice, which is totally different from introducing state ownership in theoretically open markets. What Sento said about Telecom Italia is very common wherever you have a state-owned incumbent, and the same happens nearly in any other sector, in many different ways, but that's what happens. So you have to, well, not you, the people who are here, but you, member states, and you, European Commission, have to make clear what competition is about, and why and whether we do really want competition. If we want competition, we have sooner or later to give up on state ownership, and vice versa.
Professor Shackleton, I wanted to ask you on this your recent publication, the Renationalization, Back to the Future. When we look at this all movements on want government to come back the companies to their hands, and could you elaborate on this issue? Do you see that as the government wants at the same time to make more state aid more generous, and want to come back companies to their own hands, that is connected, this two, from the first view, quite separate decisions?
Well, I think you have to. There's different people involved in this. I think the popular feeling that is reflected in opinion polls is that some of the privatised industries have not behaved particularly well. They've been paying their executives extortionate amounts, and the public don't like this. In the case of the railways, there have been all sorts of problems of poor service, delays, etc., which are actually down to the nationalised part, the network rail, rather than the passenger operating companies. But nevertheless, the public perceive a set of problems like this. And there is, again, on the railways, there is the classic problem, which is always there, of should the taxpayer subsidise the fares? You know, the fares are so high because running railways is actually a very expensive business these days, because such high levels of safety regulation and so forth compared with road transport. It's just laughable, actually. So you've got this very expensive thing, and the public want to offload that onto the taxpayer rather than onto the consumer. So you've got that kind of stuff. But the Labour Party is clearly reviving old ideas of common ownership and so forth, which go back to the late 19th century. Some of these arguments. In fact, it's quite interesting. When I was reading up for that kind of stuff, I discovered that W.E. Gladstone, the great free trading liberal of the 19th century, was actually in favour of nationalising railways. That's a very long time ago. So you've got these different political approaches, and it's. You know, even in the Conservative Party is affected by this kind of mood, and it's having to make moves in various directions. If you look at the energy area, for example, you've written about this a lot, Carlo, about the UK. You know, we had in the 2015 election, I think it was, the Labour Party was saying there ought to be a price cap. And the Conservatives said, no, it shouldn't be a price cap, that's actually outrageous and so forth. But then, they subsequently brought in 2017, wasn't it, a price cap. So the Conservative Party is affected by this kind of mood as well, and it's really quite depressing. I think to some extent it's a generational thing. You know, people have forgotten what nationalised industries were like, and you have to remember that you know, we privatised stuff in the UK a very long time ago now, 25, 30 years ago in some cases. And many of the voters, probably over half of the voters, weren't around, or at least weren't consciously around at that time. And they've forgotten that kind of stuff. And all they see are the apparent problems of the privatised industries, and they want to switch back. So it's a very difficult political situation at the moment, I think.
Barbara, I do have a question. Do you see from different countries' experiences that state aid is more generous to state-owned enterprises in railway sector, for example?
Yeah, I think not just on the level of direct awards, as it was mentioned, and I think the generosity also goes hand in hand with not lack of control. So I think the state aid is on two levels. So one is the active state aid, providing state aid, and the second is a little bit passive level of not controlling what state probably should control. Whoever they will grant the direct award or the PSO in general too. We clearly see it from, for example, from the Czech Republic. There is a report of the National Supreme Audit Authority that says Ministry of Transportation was supposed to make some kind of methodology to be able to control the money that goes to PSO. However, Ministry has not created anything like this. But in the meanwhile, the only awarded company, Czech Railways, they established their methodology. So now, if you now ask Ministry of Transportation about the data and if everything is okay, if they really used the finance for the particular line, they can't really check it. The only way how they can check it is that they ask the company, which is joint venture, 100% owned by state, and the company says, we checked it with our methodology and everything is fine. And this is how they collect the data. This is how they prove that the data are fine. So there is lack of data, and I think this is the passive state aid that helps railways or the state-owned companies as well.
Carlo, you mentioned about that maybe there is a need for specific state aid regulation for state-owned enterprises. Do you think it will be enough, or would you have some suggestion for some more instruments how to make limits for state-owned enterprises, or expansion of, or to especially creating unfair competition situation in these markets? And I would have the same question maybe for participants.
No, I think that at least two changes should or could be made to the state aid discipline in order to better manage the cases where state-owned enterprises are involved. The first one is sort of reversing the burden of the proof for state-owned enterprises, at the very least when they make investments outside their core business. The example I made in the previous panel of a state-owned railway that invests in a failed airline is what is happening in Italy with Trenitalia, which is the railway almost quasi-monopolist, that has said that they are ready to buy stakes in Alitalia, which is the bankrupt country airline. Of course, this is, to any reasonable extent, this is state aid. However, it will be hard to prove, because Trenitalia will always argue that they are, even though that they are state-owned, they behave as a private company, and that's an investment that they are allowed to make as well as anybody else. Now, in cases like this, I would say that there should, at least when they are sizable, there should be a presumption that an investment like this is state aid, and the state-owned companies should show and convince the DG Comp or whoever that there is actually some underlying logic in the investment. Otherwise, the investment should be blocked. And the second change I would make is when you have to deal with tendering processes, like water networks or power networks or natural gas networks, which are given to formerly private subject for a certain period of time, let's say 10 years or 12 years or whatever. In these cases, I would say that it should not be allowed the participation in the tender from companies that are owned by the tendering entity. For example, if a municipality gives out for tender its water network, a company which is owned by the municipality itself should not be allowed to participate. Just as a way to limit that kind of, the referee is my father, kind of problem that we see all the time whenever this kind of dynamics happens.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that last point. I mean, it's quite interesting. You're probably not aware, but Scotland has a rather different set of responsibilities than England and Wales. And the Scottish National Party, which is in government in Scotland, actually requires a public sector tender for a lot of its operations, like buses and ferries and even, I think, rail now as well. And that's something which is really, I think, wrong. I think they should be genuine private tenders rather than public tenders.
Yeah, I think I don't have anything to add. I quite like the idea of raising the burden of proof. I kind of imagine what would be the answer from state-owned companies, that they would say we are one private company, so we can't have the special regime. However, it will be interesting, and I think will be really helpful. Can we also ask, when we are not so many, to the audience, because I would have question for you regarding how can you apply state aid rules in the market that is already distorted, per se. The railway market is already...
Me?
Yes.
You again.
Yeah. Right.
You're part of the panel now.
Yeah. Sorry, what's the question?
Because if you say that the state aid shouldn't be threat for, or shouldn't mean a distortion of the market, but the railway market is distorted from the beginning. So the competition is something that it's not really in the current system of railways. So what changes then should be made that it will be really a sector that would be competitive with the normal competitive rules of competition, because it's not common in railways. Railway has special competition rules. I understand it's a difficult question.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Hoping for some great help.
Well, I mean, typically in these network industries, when they've tried to foster competition, is this on? Hello? Yeah. The first step is to put constraints on the activity of the network operator, make him subject to general competition law, and have access requirements. So in telecoms, they had to give access to their network under competitive terms, and there were access rates set by the regulator so as to foster competition. Or they went more extreme and had the separation thing. Now the railways, I remember in the UK, when I was working for a consulting company, we were invited in to talk to British Rail about the railways, and I've got to say that I ran a mile from that whole privatisation exercise, because there was debates about having regional railway companies or an essential facility type concept of the network, and having franchises for rail companies bid for it. So that there were all sorts of models being proposed for the way to privatise it and at the same time create competition. If you're going to maintain state-owned enterprises, there's usually typically a problem, and that's what was experienced in the UK, is that when they went through the privatisation process, sometimes they forgot about competition, because they were not necessarily, but the bankers were keeping on telling them, well, if you introduce competition, you're not going to maximise the value of the sale, or people won't be interested in buying the shares and all that type of stuff, and we won't get our underwriting commission at the level we expect to get it. And So they were a bit hoodwinked by the banks about how to do privatisation. But I mean, the short answer to your question is that you have to have a more intrusive type of regulation then, in order to level the playing field, so to speak, and then that gives rise to another set of problems. But railways is a difficult one. I hope I got out that one.
Karina Lange from Ellie Consulting. I can't say about railways, sorry, that's not my sector, but I wanted to give one example from the Netherlands, where, because in the Netherlands there were a lot of complaints about the unlevel playing field between state-owned companies that are operating in economic activities and competing with public companies. For instance, in the waste sector, where a company that is owned by various municipalities is, of course, managing the waste of that municipality, but also competing in tenders for other companies. Because there were so many complaints, the European Commission made the Netherlands introduce a law, the Wet Markt en Overheid, so law markets and governments, and in 2012, and that basically states that if a state-owned company is competing in an economic activity with private companies, they have to do so at least with cost pricing. So they have to at least cover the cost of that particular economic activity. Now, as being an economist, I personally think the aim of preventing cross-subsidization got lost a bit in how this law was phrased, because they said it has to be the cost of that state-owned enterprise, whereas really it should be the cost of what a market player would be, because the state-owned enterprise still has cost advantages. So that was an attempt to do something about it and to create a level playing field. Whether it was really efficient and really prevented it, I'm not sure. I personally think it should have been an equally efficient operator cost model rather than their own cost model. But yeah, just to give an example of how government tried to intervene there.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll finish our this event. I think we covered a very important issue, and if to look at the competitiveness of EU, I think state aid policy is a big instrument which helps to make fair competition and makes to foster innovation and growing economy. And especially when we want to pay attention during this event, and I hope you all in the future, that state-owned enterprises should be very, very specifically supervised on this state aid policy agenda, because it's not about using taxpayers' monies. It's also about creating opportunities for new businesses, newcomers, and for us all consumers. So thank you for participating.
Thank you.
I'm back again for a second. There's another coffee break if any of you fancy. It's going to be downstairs again. We would like every one of you to come. We would like the Lithuanian Free Market Institute and Epicenter to work with us on this really interesting topic. And also, because we're a German organization, a little bit of bureaucracy. So everybody who didn't sign up on the list downstairs yet, please do so. Thank you.
Thank you.